Are you moderating tonight, Fabiola?
I will be, yes. I am welcome you all, and I'll be recording and doing some Zoomy things here. So welcome everyone. Normally for Open Sangha, we would be gathered at our beautiful temple in downtown Asheville. But thanks to technology, here we are now virtually and able to see so many more of you, which I think is lovely. So we are here for our 6th session for the Lojong series that Dr. Lai is offering. So we are going to do that. Most of you have the text, Tibetan Spirit. You can download it there. And we'll welcome everyone.
Yay.
I see Dr. Lai here, there. Yeah, we're not, I thought I was the only one, Dr. Lai. We can't hear you.
Ah, now can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yay.
Yes. Anyway, welcome to the 6th part of Mahayana Lojong in 7 points. We don't know how long the series is going to be. I guess we'll just keep going until we are not going anymore, I suppose. So anyway, I ask that you please check and make sure that you have muted your sound, your microphone, if you are joining us on Zoom. And then if you're joining us on Facebook, as I was saying, I think Fabiola will pay attention as well to any comments or questions that you post on Facebook. And then of course, if you are with us on Zoom, then a slightly different experience that you will have. There's also the chat function on Zoom that you can type your question if you are shy to ask out loud. Although I think part of the whole Zoom experience is the ability to be able to talk to each other. So I encourage you to also use that. So again, I want to thank Fabiola for moderating this teaching this evening. She will, from time to time, turn the view to speaker view and to also the gallery view. So she's doing that as well. So anyway, a few words about Urban Dharma. So we are a 100% volunteer organization, including myself, the spiritual director. I'm not paid either. So one thing I want to say is that we are doing okay right now. Because the model that we have adopted is the model of sustaining membership, which means people pledge monthly to give a certain amount. And for most people, they have already planned this in their annual kind of budgeting. Of course, a lot of things are changing right now, but we're fortunate, according to the treasurer, we are doing okay. So we don't have any special plea, asking you, oh, our temple have been closed, we have to pay rent, people are not coming into the temple, we're not getting any donations. We are very fortunate that we are not needing to send out that plea. However, the principle of generosity, of giving, of dana is an underlying principle in this particular path. And so the opportunity to offer something in return for what we're receiving is always there. So posted now on our Facebook page is a picture basically, and some words saying, giving you the easiest way for you to make a contribution, other than sending a check to us, which is great, then nobody takes a percentage out of it. But if sending checks, or if you even ask like checks, what are those things, If you're young, you're probably like, checks, what are checks, right? Then we have a link to our website, to our page. There's a page on our website called Giving. So once you go there, you just enter the amount, you enter the name, you click, and then it will take you to the place that you can enter your credit card information. So any kind of dana that you give to Urban Dharma being a church, is tax deductible for United States IRS reporting purposes. So those are the things that I have to say before I talk about the Dharma, because after all, even the spiritual director of a Buddhist center will have to play a role in reminding people of this opportunity. So anyway, now we look at the topic that we are gathered this evening. So it's the Mahayana Lojong in 7 points. We have started already up to this point. The first 2 points, we have also looked at point number 5, which is the measure of Lojong. So as I said at the beginning, the way I'm going to approach this text isn't going to be the usual way of start with point 1 and end up in point 7. Because my view of this text is that it's a very organic text. and also that each of the points of the 7 points, we are to relate to the contents of each of these 7 points slightly differently depending on where they turn up. So it's not necessarily a book that you read from, point 1 to point 7. Then within the points, you read in this rigid order. It's a text, and more importantly, it's a tradition of training the heart mind, training the heart mind, training what is right now, the monkey mind, that due to self-cherishing, this heart mind, this monkey mind, is actually leading us to a lot of mischief, so to say, and resulting in again and again, right, unsatisfactory experiences, or called dukkha, or unsatisfactory taken to its kind of biggest kind of conclusion, so to say, is what we call suffering. So Lojong is to train this heart mind, this monkey mind, so that it becomes the mind or the heart mind that is awakened, the Buddha mind. The Buddha mind, in this tradition, we use the word bodhicitta. So both in its absolute aspect and in its relative aspect. So the main training of Mahayana Lojong is training in the 2 bodhicittas. So we have already started to do the formal meditation of the training in the absolute or ultimate bodhicitta. So very quickly, as a reminder, bodhicitta, I feel often it is translated as the altruistic mind, but I think that it's very clear that if bodhicitta is translated as altruistic mind, that at best only captures the relative aspect of bodhicitta. And it for sure doesn't capture the absolute aspect of bodhicitta. So for me personally, I prefer to keep this word in its Sanskrit, which is bodhicitta, because bodhicitta has both the absolute aspect and the relative aspect. Then, in the absolute aspect, what is foregrounded is the training in wisdom. And this wisdom is the wisdom that realizes the emptiness or the lack of essence, the lack of substantiality, the lack of essence, the lack of substantiality of all phenomena, of all things, of all people, of all states, of all conditions. And so that is the wisdom aspect. So in absolute bodhicitta, the wisdom aspect is foregrounded, but nonetheless, what lies in the background is love and compassion. On the other hand, the training in relative bodhicitta, love and compassion is foregrounded. Then what lies in the background still has to be wisdom. So in relative bodhicitta, we train especially in developing love and compassion for all sentient beings, for all beings without exception. Then that love and compassion is directed to or driven by a clear understanding that the only way that anyone can truly achieve freedom from suffering and achieve true happiness is when they become Buddhists. So that is the wisdom aspect of this love and compassion in relative bodhicitta. Lacking that wisdom, we cannot call just ordinary love and compassion bodhicitta. And so that's why I think the translation of altruistic mind is insufficient and to the point of being, I think, misleading. Here, I'm not trying to, like insist on some kind of orthodoxy or to enforce any kind of orthodoxy. But I do feel like we need to have a clear understanding of what these terms mean. If we're going to use them, if we're going to train in them, if we're going to develop what the Buddha taught as bodhicitta, we need to know that clearly. Yeah? So we started already, as I said, the formal meditation on absolute bodhicitta. So tonight, we will begin by doing that. Then, before we can do that, it says in this tradition, first train in the preliminaries. So first train in the preliminaries. So for the preliminaries, then the training there is to turn our mind away, to turn our mind away from continuing to invest our time, our attention, our resources, our body and mind in those things that ultimately don't bring, right, the happiness that we're looking for. Earlier I said, like self-cherishing, self-grasping is the root of confusion, is the confusion that leads to all states of unhappiness that we experience. Ironically, the self-grasping actually comes from something that is even more basic than self-grasping. And what is this basic thing? It's this innate desire, this innate need, this innate want to be happy. So that's the irony. Due to this innate, meaning nobody ever taught us, nobody need to teach us, please don't like suffering, please like happiness, without anybody teaching us. A child born without knowing anything else even, immediately, instinctively wants happiness, doesn't want suffering. So that's basic to all beings that have mind, have that innate quality. That innate quality is the cause of why some beings become Buddhas and some beings become, I guess we could say, the proverbial Hitler, right? But they are motivated by the same innate desire to not want suffering and to want happiness. And so here, that's the great equalizer. And kind of recognizing that, I think, also helps us to have more patience with others, especially those others that we perceive to be engaging in negativity, causing suffering to themselves, causing suffering to others. It is not like somehow, right, they are perverted. It's not like somehow, right, their root, their essence is evil. No, it's just confusion. Their motivation that have resulted in suffering for themselves and others. The motivation that has resulted in beings becoming Buddhas, becoming awake, that motivation, that drive is the same drive. Where the difference is, with regards to Buddhas, that drive was directed to the methods and the ways and the trainings that will actually deliver that innate desire and that can fulfill this basic desire to want to be happy and not want to be miserable. Whereas the other direction has led to continuous suffering, cyclic we call it. It's just chasing its own tail. continuous suffering for both self and other. So we need to recognize that. And once we recognize that, then we say, okay, if I don't want, right, to suffer now, yeah, I don't want to experience, right, suffering. I don't want to experience that which is unpleasant. What do I have to do? Well, we have to decide, how am I going to invest my time? So that's why these 4 thoughts that turn the mind basically helps us to bring into focus, like, if we want to be free, if we don't want to be dragged around by the afflictive emotions, what do we have to do? We need to train. We need to train specifically here in the 2 bodhicittas. So before that, we need to train in this preliminary of turning away from distractions, reprioritizing, really thinking, seriously, taking seriously the question of, given the time that we have left, what are we going to invest it in? What is most meaningful to invest our time and our resources in? Then when we become clear about that, then whatever else that we need to do to maintain our lives, to continue the responsibilities that we have for other people who are counting on us, figure out how you can attend to all those things, but without becoming distracted from what we decide is the most crucial thing. So in the Lotus Sutra, it says, that single most important thing related to the question of birth and death is the question that we have to resolve in this life. In this lifetime, we have to resolve the single most important question, the question of birth and death, coming and going. We want to continue to come and go and being dragged around by the power of confusion and all the afflictive emotions that result from confusion, or do we want to be free? Do we want to be free from bondage, or do we want to continue to be bound? If we want to be free from bondage, then we need to be resolute. To achieve that resolution, that kind of resolved heart mind, then we first train in the preliminaries known as the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. So first, I'm going to read these 4 thoughts that turn the mind from a commentary of Lojong, composed by this great master, who is the 5th Shamarpa. In the Karmakagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, there are 2 very famous kind of great lamas in that lineage. One is called the Karmapa, and one is called the Shamarpa. So the 5th Shamarpa wrote a very concise commentary on the Lojong in 7 points. So now I'll share with you what he wrote. Very pithy, but it's enough. It's enough for us to serve as like a prompt for us to really turn our mind away from distractions. So we'll first start with that and to contemplate that. Consider the fact that although we now have a human body, it will be difficult to obtain one in the future. Consider that the time of death is uncertain, and that it may arrive all of a sudden. Consider that all cyclic existence, the entirety of cyclic existence, entails dissatisfaction. And finally, consider that suffering originates in non-virtue and happiness originates in goodness. Again, consider the fact that although we now have a human body with all the leisures and opportunities that we have been afforded, this human existence will be difficult to obtain in the future. In the sense, you can say, this might not be repeatable. Even if you don't believe in multiple lifetimes, and especially if you don't believe, you find that you cannot literally believe in multiple lifetimes, then for sure, this life cannot be repeated again. And so now that you have it, do not waste it away. Do not squander away this great opportunity to become awake, to become free. Consider that the time of death is uncertain, our lives are like a dewdrop on a blade of grass. Any moment, this dewdrop will dissolve and life will come to an end very suddenly, without any ability to negotiate, without any ability. We do not have ability to change when the Lord of Death knocks on our door. Consider that all of cyclic existence, all of our existence that is under the power, under the control of confusion and the afflictive emotions, no matter how good it might seem sometimes, it still entails dissatisfaction and suffering. Because as long as the mind is under the power of confusion, true happiness, true satisfaction is not possible. So do not be misled by superficial experiences of happiness and then think that cyclic existence is not so bad after all, and then think confusion is not so powerful after all. And the next thing we know, if we believe that, is we will be caught up and dragged around by our afflictive emotions. So much so that sometimes we feel that we exist in the God realms. Sometimes we feel we are existing in the hell realms. And between God realm and hell realm is often just one moment, one breath. Suddenly everything is so good. Suddenly everything is so terrible. Suddenly everything is so exciting. Suddenly everything is so boring. And so even with this human body, from morning to night, we cycle through different states of existence, of elation, of depression, of excitement, of boredom, of inspiration, of disgust, again and again, in and out, up and down, left and right, with no freedom whatsoever. We get dragged around. Finally, consider that which we call suffering comes from somewhere And it comes from the non-virtue that we have created, so that our minds become incapable of experiencing happiness. Likewise, consider how that which we call happiness comes from, is the result of us having engaged in goodness, in virtue, in the acts that produce happiness. Because the acts that we create allows our mind the opportunity to recognize and experience happiness. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Be grateful for the ability to breathe. Be grateful for the ability to inhale and the ability to exhale. And let breath help you now to settle your body and mind. To let body and mind find a place of rest, a place of ease, as well as a place of clarity. So this rest and ease also has a quality of presence. It's not just a mind and body that is rested, but radiant at the same time. When body and mind are settled in the way that we are talking about here, they are both radiant and at ease, shining, glistening, luminous. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And breathe in, breathe out. Then as we proceed now to the second point of the 7-point Lojong, in the second point, first, absolute bodhicitta, and more specifically, the training in absolute bodhicitta is given first. But before we train in the meditation of absolute bodhicitta, some preparation is necessary. This preparation is like tilling the land, preparing the ground before we put these precious seedlings, before we plant anything. First, we want to prepare the ground. Remove the pebbles, remove the excessive clay, mix in lime and other nutritious things. Perhaps plant other plants to encourage nitrogen in the ground. So the more we prepare the ground before we put in the seeds, the more the yield that is going to come later. So first we have to prepare. The first preparation, according to the commentaries, is to generate relative bodhicitta. In the second point of Lojong training, meditation on relative bodhicitta, which is the meditation on Tonglen, is given later. But at the beginning of this section, nonetheless, we should bring to mind the supreme motivation, which is going to be the fuel that will propel us, that will feed us as we train in absolute bodhicitta. And so first, we begin with some recitations that will help us generate bodhicitta and also to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So you can just listen as I read these passages of bodhicitta and of refuge. All mother sentient beings, meaning sentient beings that are as kind to us as our mother has been kind to us. So regard all beings as kind, as loving to us. So all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially and including those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in a state of the most perfect and precious awakening. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, and those obstructors who stand in my way, and those who create obstacles on my path, the liberation and all-knowingness on my path to being Buddha. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. Wishing them to experience happiness is what we call loving kindness. Wishing them to be separated from suffering is what we call compassion. So as mentioned earlier, relative bodhicitta foregrounds loving kindness and compassion. Then the next line, I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. In the background is this line, which is pointing to wisdom, knowing and recognizing that all temporary forms of suffering isn't really the solution to the confusion of samsara. That only by having achieved the state of the most perfect and precious awakening can we truly be free from suffering. And the third recitation, all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path of liberation and all-knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in a state of the most perfect and precious awakening. So this recitation is called the aspiration of relative bodhicitta. Next is the engagement aspect of relative bodhicitta. So having made the vow, having made the resolve to achieve the state of Buddha out of love and compassion for all beings, now we make the commitment to train and to practice from now, this time, until tomorrow, from now until the end of this life, and from now until we finally achieve the state of Buddha, that continuously, uninterruptedly, we make this resolve that we will engage in virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind. We will engage in refraining from creating the 10 non-virtues, and to engage in the practice of the 10 virtues, and to practice what's known as the 6 paramitas of bodhisattvas. So the recitation says, thus, until I achieve awakening, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time from tomorrow, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Having resolved our mind in this way, in all the preliminaries up to this point, now we begin by counting our breath. Inhale, exhale, 1. Inhale, exhale, 2. And try to count all the way to 21. If you're able to count all the way to 21 without being distracted, then it is said that you have gained some skills. And the skill of being able to bring your mind and your body together at will. Not just when things are exciting or things are terrifying or things are painful or extremely pleasurable, that your mind and body is finally together. And those moments are rather limited compared to the rest of the time that we are awake. But when our mind and our body are separated, with the mind constantly somewhere else, sometimes lost in the past, sometimes lost in the future, rarely right here. When that happens, we become exhausted. When that happens, we create the causes of suffering. When that happens, the body is left alone to carry the burdens. And so the body becomes weak. Disease enters. Pain develops. First acute, then chronic, and all sorts of stresses and pains become stronger and stronger. So the first step is to bring the mind back to the body in one place, body and mind, present, radiant, alert, at rest, and awake. And the method given here is to count your breath. Inhale, exhale 1. Inhale, exhale 2. Be sure that you let your natural breathing determine the counting, rather than using your counting to force yourself to breathe in a certain way, fast or slow or whatever rhythm that your counting is. Don't do that. Instead, the counting is subtle, almost like an echo. Every time the mind sees that one inhalation and exhalation is completed, there's an echo almost in the background that says 1. Then inhale, exhale. Somewhere back there, there's an echo that says 2. Inhale, exhale. And then again, the echo 3. So now we will do that. When you find yourself lost in the middle of counting, you have not failed, because this is the practice. And if you find yourself lost in the counting, go back to 1 and 2 and 3. Lost, go back to 1, 2, 3. If it is helpful, if the counting has become kind of stale, which is sometimes it happens, then you can shift your focus to the consideration of how, as you breathe in, feel how your whole body opens up from the inside. The entire body expands outwards. And feel that when you breathe in, you're breathing in space. Space to every single corner of your body, every single cell, all the spaces that are in your body. All that space opens up. And as a result, your mind also experiences space as you breathe in. And then as you exhale, feel that space opens now outwards. Whereas with inhalation, space is opening up from within. When you exhale, space is experienced going outwards infinitely in all directions. So that in both cases, whether you're inhaling or exhaling, you're experiencing the vastness of both time, space, material, and mental, spiritual. Breathe in space, breathe out space. Breathe in freedom, breathe out freedom. That if there is an I, if there is a me, it is simply this door that swings out and swings in as breath comes in and breath goes out. And this approach to relating to breath can be seen as a bridge to absolute bodhicitta meditation. Where the prompts, the one-liners for absolute bodhicitta training, the first two lines that are most relevant for at this point of the meditation. The first line says, regard all phenomena, meaning all experiences, as dreams. Or to update this to a more modern experience, regard all phenomena as if it's happening like a movie, vividly clear, evoking emotional responses, but nonetheless, you know that it is just a movie, it is just a dream. And the next line, see or examine is the word used here, but you can say see, try to see how that which is aware, that which is experiencing all these experiences is simply what is known as birthless awareness. That there is no need to carry the burden of I, me, mine. That simply what is going on is just awareness. And this awareness has no beginning. And if it doesn't have any beginning, here called birthless, then it also has no end. Being birthless and deathless, it's also called being insubstantial. So we do not have to worry about maintaining this I, this me, this mine. Instead, we can just relax. So this is the training in absolute bodhicitta, the meditation in absolute bodhicitta that we should do now. Let 70% of your attention be anchored still on your breath, either counting them or breathing in space and freedom, breathing out space and freedom, while allowing the other 30% of your attention, if you want to quantify it that way, to remembering, to recognizing that whatever thoughts other than your breath that might come up, feelings, emotions, plans, fears, hopes, whatever it is, whatever else that turns up right now, do not let any of it have any power over you, because they are but like dreams. They are but like things that happen in the movie. And the you and the I, the mind, the awareness that you think that you need to protect, that you need to carry it around, that you need to nurture, is simply like that door that swings out and in as breath comes in and goes out. The so-called self is simply a swinging door, in, out. In other words, experience the vastness of your mind, of your awareness, of your being. Experience how it can be free if it doesn't grasp, if it doesn't fixate. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. And so this is the first part of training in absolute bodhicitta. The other lines that are in this section, if you look at the text, the root text, it says, let even the antidote be freed in its own place, and the essence of the path is settling in the alaya state. I could, try to say something about these two lines, but really, if we want to train well in this approach, then we should not rush into trying to understand what's in these lines here. Because these lines here are given as prompts for us to deepen our meditation. So if right now, for the most part, right, just staying with the breath is still quite a challenge, then to try to do more than that is simply like, sort of like you are on a journey to somewhere and you have heard so much about how wonderful, right, 10 miles down the road is, or 20 miles down the road is, or 300 miles down the road is. And you're so excited about actually getting there, seeing what's there. But to the point that you forget the road that you're on now. and possibly other vehicles, then not only is it pointless, it can also become dangerous. Because then you are just theorizing what lays 10 miles down the road instead of attending to where you are right now. So for the most part, where we are right now is still, right? Utilizing breath in order to bring body and mind back together, in order to cultivate presence. As I said, like when presence is scattered, the body becomes the only thing that can, carry all the beatings that occurs when mind is somewhere else. But when mind and body is back together in the same place at the same time, then no more beatings. Body don't need to suffer. Mind don't need to suffer. Then when body and mind do not need to suffer, right? When body and mind is not suffering anymore, then it's in a good place to begin to understand deeper, which is the start of absolute bodhicitta, which is the wisdom that needs to be cultivated, the insight, right? The vipassana. You hear a lot about vipassana meditation. Here, vipassana in this context is not so much a technique. Vipassana is the state of being. It's when we begin to see things more clearly, when we begin to understand the nature of experiences more clearly, which here is indicated by these two prompts. All phenomena are as dreams. Awareness, which is the basis in which we come up with this idea called I. And then once we have I, you have me, you have mine. That this awareness, this I, me, that which is mine came from me, that which is me came from I. This I is a mistaken conclusion due to the presence of awareness. So now we need to see clearly what is this awareness, and to see how this awareness is birthless. Once we begin to experience the birthless, in other words, the insubstantial nature of awareness, then we don't need to carry the burden of I anymore. Then we can drop me, we can drop mine. That's when we experience the second line. So how do we experience this? We need to examine the nature. Here, examine doesn't mean, drawing charts, coming up with points and categories. It means, pay attention. See how I, me, mine. It's a projection based on the presence of awareness, but not understanding what the quality of this awareness is. We produce, we misproduce, we project I, me, mine. Once I, me, mine is present, then that which is not me, that which is not mine, that which is not I turns up. Then sometimes fighting, sometimes chasing. Then that's how cyclic existence gets produced. So at this point in our training, even though we're doing a little bit of absolute bodhicitta meditation, first for most of us is still helping mind come back to this body, so that body and mind is on the seat. So this is the training in absolute bodhicitta that we should start with. So we'll take a very brief break, about 5 minutes. Then when we come back, I want to look at the other sections of this text And I believe there might be some questions. So we'll start the next section. And I will attempt, I don't know if I will successfully, I will attempt to answer any questions. So you can type it on Facebook, we'll check there. And you can also, if you're on Zoom, type it on the chat if you don't want to ask. Or you can just ask if you are on chat, if you're on Zoom with us right after this break. So about 5 minutes. So everyone can stretch a little, maybe run to the bathroom or whatever, right? Okay, so we'll have a very short break. Back. So any questions?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question here on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lai, could you please speak briefly on the basic difference between consciousness as we know it and that of birthless and deathless awareness?
I think I already said maybe before this, after this question was asked, or anyway. So right now, okay, so nonetheless, good question. So here to clarify, it's not as if consciousness as we know it right now is somehow not birthless. So when it says, examine the birthless nature of awareness, it's not as if right now, in a state of confusion, our awareness is not birthless. It is still birthless. The most noble thought that occurs, like, generally feeling like love and compassion for all beings, that moment is birthless. The most murderous, unthinkable thought, that thought is also birthless. Birthless means insubstantial. There's no essence to it. It's only something that has temporarily, interdependently arisen due to many factors coming together, then that turns up. And at least on this level, because there are many levels of understanding, but on a level that I think certainly I can understand reasonably well, and I think that all of us can understand reasonably well, the point of seeing how whatever thoughts, whatever emotions, and especially I think emotions that we have, to be able to see how they are birthless or how they are insubstantial, allow us then free them from being conditioned, being punished, being controlled, being bound by these thoughts, these concepts, these ideas, these fears, and these hopes. So here, birthless and deathless, I don't think we need to go, and I'm not saying that the question implies this, but just in case, yeah. I don't think we need to take this in the direction of some kind of concept or theory about this universal mind, or this, even if you want to call it Buddha mind, or universal consciousness. Here, I would say in Lojong, and generally I say in all of Buddha Dharma, there is very little emphasis or interest in speculating about these kind of mystical big things. Everything the Buddha taught, is to be experienced and applied without needing to kind of have a leap of faith into like the unknown. But everything the Buddha taught, if we understand what is being said, it's actually not that easy not that difficult to experience. What is difficult is for the experience to be stable and to last. But to experience it, I would say without, I'm not boasting here. I'm saying you, me, anyone. Once we understand, what the Buddha is saying as something that can be experienced now, you can experience it. It's not that hard. What's hard is for the experience and then the take-home lesson from that experience to be made sustainable, to remain. That's the difficult part. So that's why another word for meditation is actually habituation. That's where the hard work is to habituate those truths that we can experience once we understand what the Buddha is saying. Yes. So.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions anywhere else.
Okay.
For now.
Anyone else has any questions based on the meditation, guided meditation that we did at the beginning? Or the first part of tonight?
I have a question about
Okay.
the process piece. Is there the aspect of not being able to find the origination of this moment? I mean, you go back and back, and one thing is dependent upon the other, and it keeps going back and back and back, and you can never find the beginning. And also the fact that this moment, the interdependence of this moment will never be repeated, so it is insubstantial. It can be let go. Is there that all involved in this as well, or not?
You can say that, but during the meditation itself, the formal meditation, it's best not to stir up thoughts, like
Right.
to try to think it through. Oh, well, where did this come from? Like this come from here, this come from here, this come from here, and then I cannot find it. Even though yes, when we're studying intellectually, outside the context of the seated meditation session, it is good to kind of intellectually study that, to see, because elsewhere the teachings can help, in kind of like walking us through the logic of why the nature of awareness is birthless and therefore deathless. That's one way of stating it. Or more simply, that this awareness, this mind, this being, this who we are is actually insubstantial. So elsewhere, there are teachings, there are explanations that can walk us through this. But when we are seated here doing the meditation, we don't want to encourage a lot of like proliferation of thoughts. So how we use these two prompts has to be based on having done that kind of studying that I was talking about, outside the context of seated meditation. So that somewhere in your mind, right, you have already kind of gone down that road, so to say. So that now, as you are here doing counting, count, then a thought comes up. That is the opposite of the counting, right? A thought comes out like, oh, this coronavirus is terrible. Or the way this government, the way the president has handled it is terrible, right? That thought comes up. In that moment, right? Whatever you have learned from the past about the nature of this thought that is other than what you have resolved to do, which is be present with your breath. So this other thought, this other distraction that has turned up, immediately you want to recognize, this has no power over me. This is just interdependently arising, momentarily arising. It is not worth my energy to try to kick it away, destroy it. And it is also not worth me following it around. Just equanimity. In a lot less words than this. It's supposed to just have a response to it, like, this is insubstantial.
Kind of knowing you can't ever trace it back helps me to not worry
Yeah.
about it.
Yes. And so, but so knowing that, studying.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, somewhere else.
Not yet.
This session, you don't want to start.
Right.
What is it? Can it be found?
No, I understand.
Yeah. Don't do it while you are in the formal meditation session.
Right.
But
Thank you.
having learned about it, having come to some conclusions about it through those learning, that's important. That will leave an imprint so that when you need that imprint to work now, it can come more easily. That's why we also have classes where we study, where we try to walk through, right, the points. But when we're doing the meditation, that's not what we are doing in the meditation session.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lai,
Yes.
you say something about, maybe if you've said this before and don't want to answer it, that's fine. I might have missed it, but I was trying to write down this evening the steps that you were giving us.
Mm-hmm.
Just wondering, I assume what distinguishes Lojong from what we normally do at Urban Dharma, it has something to do with, we start out in Lojong with the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, the preliminaries, but in our liturgical books at Urban Dharma, we start out with the aspiration bodhicitta, right? So,
yeah, sure.
So is there something to be said about Lojong changing this order, or our tradition changing the order of Lojong?
Not necessarily. I think it's just context. It's just, I personally, I don't think it matters.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, elsewhere, more specifically, so Urban Dharma follows, for the most part, when Urban Dharma is doing anything Tibetan, Urban Dharma also does things that are not Tibetan. But when Urban Dharma are doing things that are Tibetan, more often than not, it's anchored in Drigong Kagyu traditions. Then in Drigong Kagyu traditions, we begin with the aspiration bodhicitta, engagement bodhicitta recitations, and then refuge, and then 4 immeasurables, right? But elsewhere, the founder of Drigong Kagyu, he says, within a session, you begin with 4 thoughts that turn the mind. And so it's not much of a difference.
Yeah.
It's just that if we follow Geshe Chekawa's text, then he says, for the preliminaries, first, you want to get rid of distractions. How do you get rid of distractions? You contemplate the 4 turnings, turning away from distraction. Then he says, you take refuge. Then you generate bodhicitta. In fact, the commentary says you should also engage in the 7-fold puja. But I think, for our purposes, that's a lot. So I didn't emphasize that. And all of that can be summarized as, if your relationship with these teachings, you're like, I'm really not like into the whole Buddhist thing, that's fine. I'm not requiring that the only way you're going to get something out of this is you commit to this. Then the take-home lesson is, before you do, right, the counting of the breath, before you kind of begin to understand, see more about, the nature of experiences, the nature of phenomena, what is this all about, right? Before you do those meditations, remember that it is important to resolve, right? At least for the time that you're going to be doing this, I'm going to say no to whatever else that's trying to get my attention. That's the equivalent of the four thoughts that turn the mind. If you want to do this completely, quote unquote, secular, which I think reasonably, if you just randomly came on Facebook and saw this, that's a reasonable motivation. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. And I'm not saying that it's less. So if that's where you're coming from, no problem. Then if, the specifics of four thoughts that turn the mind is just a turn off, maybe, then at least the take home point here is, if you are going to spend time meditating, watching your breath, and doing all the other things in the main point, then you have to begin by resolving. For the duration of this time, whatever else that is important, whatever else that normally takes up my time, my attention, my resources, right now, you all need to stop. Right now, I'm not going to be answering your calls. I'm not going to be answering your text messages. I'm not going to be answering your WhatsApp demands. All of that, like, stop. So that's first point. Then second point, where we do Bodhicitta, right? Aspiration, engagement, taking refuge for immeasurables. Then for you, if you're like, I don't know about all these things, right? Then at the very least, I think your take home point is you need to find ways to inspire yourself and say that change is possible. I'm not stuck in this place of confusion, in this place of dissatisfaction. Change is possible. It has been done, and now I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do this not just for my own purposes, that you need to have some appreciation that, your happiness cannot be achieved independent of or in a vacuum that doesn't care or doesn't take into consideration your understanding of other people's plight. So you need to somehow, right, have those as the motivating force to help you, to power your practice. Then for those of us who said, oh yeah, no, this Buddhist stuff, I like it, I can do it, no problem. Then in my opinion, a lot easier. But hey, we have different karma, so to say, we don't need to force everyone to do the same thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now let's go to the third point. Keeping in mind that the second point, is the main training. That is a lifetime of work. That is a lifetime of knowing a little bit more, knowing a little bit more, knowing a little bit more. Then hopefully before this series ends, at least you'll have a taste of the rest of what's in the second point. I will try to do that, so that we'll go through the absolute bodhicitta and the different trainings there. And then we will learn relative bodhicitta, Tonglen training there. You have a taste of all of that. But keep in mind that that is mainly, if you are committed to the Lojong way, point number 2 is a whole lifetime of work, or a whole lifetime of practice will be grounded in what's in the second point. So do not rush through the second point as if, it's a book that you need to read, chapter 2 before you can go to chapter 3. It's not like that. Now, chapter 3, or the third point. Right? So the third point, right, is the point that says, wait, let me get to the right page. The third point is taking adversities onto the path of awakening. And so adversities, right now, right? many of us are facing a common adversity. But how that common adversity arises is experience, is different, each of us. But I think it's fair to say, right now, adversities of all kinds that we are facing. So this third point is especially relevant for our times. So the first prompt here, the first one-liner, I like to call these all one-liners, right? When the world and its inhabitants are filled with harmful actions, transform adversities or bring those adversities into the path of awakening, or turn all of this into aids for waking up. So in a way, not at all, right? Being pedestrian or dismissive about the amount of suffering that this COVID-19 situation has brought up, not downplaying that at all, not ignoring that, not being heartless about that. But here we can say, this is a wake-up call. Are we going to ignore the facts of samsara when it is now even more clearly staring in our face? And that would be the opposite of transforming this adversity into the stuff for waking us up. So take seriously the wake-up call right now. Even as, there are prayers that we do, in the different traditions, no matter what religion, there are prayers that we do that we say, may this condition be quelled, may the suffering that has arisen go away, whether we are praying to God or whether we're doing mantra, deity yoga, whatever, right? All the things that we're doing, I think we should continue because people are suffering. So we pray for the alleviation of suffering. But praying for the alleviation of suffering should not distract us. If we really want to wake up, if we really want to be Buddhas, then in a way we can say the threats that we perceive, the suffering that we are experiencing are excellent ways, excellent reminders, excellent wake-up calls. This is like the Buddhas personally knocking on our door. Buddhas as Jehovah's Witnesses, knocking on our door saying, hey, have you heard the good news? The good news is samsara sucks. The good news is you can get out of this. Yeah. So, the actual Jehovah's Witnesses can't go door to door now. But the Buddha Jehovah's Witnesses are knocking on our door. Are we going to ignore that? And say, oh, no, I just want to do, this deity practice, that breathing practice. Or, you say, I heard, apparently in the US, there are these unscrupulous people giving stem cell treatments that will prevent coronavirus infection. Apparently, I heard on the BBC. Yeah, so we might do this, do that, or we hope, they'll come up with a vaccination, in 18 months or whatever. Yeah, all those things great when they happen, but what happens is that when they happen, we go back to business as usual. We ignore the facts of samsara. So now, when the world and its inhabitants are filled with harmful actions and harmful results, this is the time to really not ignore the realities of samsara and say, I need to wake up. Now I need to free myself from this mess so that I can then help others to be freed from this bondage. Chogyam Trungpa has a famous saying for this. He says, he calls experience the manure of experience. Normally, especially normally like negative experiences, We say, oh God, it's shitty, right? So it's based on that, right? That label that we use. Oh God, it's a shitty day, you know. In fact, that word is not allowed in radio, but this is not radio, so you know, it's like, you know, it's shitty, right? But Trungpa Rinpoche says, but this shitty experience, it's the manure of experience, and this manure of experience can be used to fertilize bodhicitta. Can be used to fertilize bodhicitta. So we should not just go around, oh, that's shitty, oh God, there's too much crap all around. But rather, you know, see, yes, of course it's crappy, but also see how if you are a good farmer, you know, you don't just see manure, you know, you see also fertilizer. Yeah. So now you say, I'm going to use this to fertilize bodhicitta. So when the world and its inhabitants are filled with negativity, take this negativity. Don't reject them. At the very least, don't ignore them. Take them. Use them as fertilizer for bodhicitta. It's not easy, you know, because our instinct is, I don't want this, or I didn't ask for this, right? And then we get stuck in so much in, I didn't ask for this. This is not fair. This is not fair. Why is it happening? My plans are messed up. That's how we, you know, instinctively we respond to suffering. Again, which is based on an innate sense of wanting to be free of suffering. Yeah? So that response, you don't need to be so hard on yourself when you have that response. Just recognize that in some ways that is your innate state, you know, being uncomfortable with suffering, because we are Buddhists. But don't let that innate response go in the wrong direction. In the wrong direction, we continue then to reproduce the mechanics and the dynamics of suffering. That's what we call samsara. Samsara is a circle. There's no end to this circle. When that instinct of not being able to stand suffering, not being able to stand shitty, crappy things that have turned up, when that instinct comes up in the face of suffering, now we have to be very careful to say, what do I do? Do I run away? Do I complain? Do I resist? Do I fight it? Or do I feed it? No, none of the above. But rather, like, okay, now I can do something about it. I can right now be free from this. So let that turn into the path, the method for waking up. And to do that, we need to have clarity about what is the problem? What is the root problem? What caused all of this? How did all of this dung, turn up? Ajahn Brahm, a very famous Theravada teacher in the Thai forest tradition, Australian. He has a book called, Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung? It's based on an incident that happened at the monastery. Like one day, literally, a truckload of dung was dropped off at the monastery, and some administrator there, like basically running around like a headless chicken saying, who ordered this truckload of dung? So it became the title of his book. That's what we perpetually walk around, complaining about, right? Who ordered this truckload of dung? Well, you did. I mean, who else ordered this truckload of dung? So first we have to recognize, well, actually I did. But then I have no idea why I did it. And now that it's here, all I'm able to experience is how bad it smells and how terrible it is, instead of going, well, that's gardening to do. So this gardening that we need to do is drive all blames into one, the next line. Meaning, this one, what is this one? Confusion. Where the suffering comes from? Confusion. And how does this confusion take form? What form does this confusion take? It takes self-cherishing, self-grasping as the form. And self-grasping is based on confusion. Self-grasping is not based on like original sin. Self-grasping is not based on the fact that you are scum and therefore you are egotistical, right? So the word egotistical is I don't like that word because it's a judgment of sorts. Self-grasping is actually a neutral, I would say. Egotistical, selfish, those are negative. Right? Clearly, those are negative. What we're talking about here in terms of self-grasping, I would say it's not even like evil. It's not. In a way, it's a very natural response, but confused. So self-grasping, fixating on self, I, doesn't make you a bad person. In fact, it comes from the fact that you are Buddha, the Buddha nature. Buddha nature cannot stand suffering. Buddha nature doesn't do well when anger is present, when jealousy is present, when impatience is present, when self-pity is present. That's why we don't get comfortable when we experience those things, because our nature is not that. Our nature is love, compassion, generosity, patience, all of that. Whenever we experience those things, we are like, so good. So that means, our nature is Buddha. But when the opposite turns up, and when we don't have understanding, and when we are confused, then we think the way to get out of that, the way to be rid of that uncomfortable feeling is to cherish the self. Like, oh, I need to protect this. One analogy that I've read, which I don't have any experience myself because I've never skied before in my life. I don't intend to do it either. I'm kind of a wimp when it comes to extreme sports. Anyway, the analogy I've heard is like when you're skiing, right? A mistake that a beginner would commit, and I definitely, if I ever try it, is that when you're going downhill, when things seem out of control, instead of leaning into, right, going downhill, and then in leaning into it, you have better control. The first mistake is that your instinct tells you to lean backwards, right? And when you lean backwards, guess what? Your 2 feet is going to go this way. And kaplunk, right? Instead of leaning forward so that you can direct. The instinct is to. And so it's that instinct, that confusion, that original confusion that leads us into this. Then samsara is what unfolds instead of leaning into. So when we feel threatened, when we feel uncomfortable, instead of letting go of this self that we're feeling is being threatened, we kind of shut in, right? We grasp in and think that in grasping in, we can protect ourselves from suffering. But instead, what we're doing is really like the equivalent of like skiing and feeling like you're not in control. You lean back. and then your legs, your feet point outwards, then disaster happens. So this driving all blames into one. Sometimes if we're not careful, we think to drive all blames into one is to blame yourself. Oh no. That's very dangerous. Drive all blames into one. This is the mistake that we make if we get confused and we think that, oh, this is like, when I was a kid, I was told, like your selfishness, that's why you are bad. That's why you experience bad things, because you are selfish. You're a terrible person. Then Lojong teachings get perverted. Then we go back to our old ways, judging ourselves, punishing ourselves, mistreating ourselves, being harsh with ourselves. I'm no good. I'm worthless. All of that. That's why Lojong, if we are not careful, Lojong training can lead to mischief, especially given our cultural, emotional, even religious baggage. It's easy for us to feed that demon. So know that when we say drive all blames into one, that one is not yourself. That one is self-grasping, provided you understand that the reason for the self-grasping is confusion. So the one that is blamed, yes, in the commentary it will say self-grasping or self-cherishing. But if you think that the self-cherishing is because it's evidence that you are the despicable person, then you got it wrong. This is not the intention of Lojong. When Lojong says, self-cherishing is the culprit, it's based on first understanding that we are diamonds, we are Buddhas, and this diamond needs to be polished. So recognize that confusion about the nature of reality, the nature of our minds, the nature of experiences, gives rise to self-cherishing, which in the end is counterproductive. That if we really want to benefit self, we need to think about benefiting others. Then ultimately we need to drop this duality of self and other. And in other words, we need to clarify that confusion. So recognize that all the negative things that we see ourselves doing, other people doing, they all come from this confusion. So this is the meaning of drive all blames into one. And you can say that this line, it's pretty heavy. And heavy sort of like in the negative sense. You can say that, So then the next line is really important. So you can say that this drive all blames into one is looking at the problem from the side of what's the negative cause of this problem, which is self-cherishing, which comes from confusion, right? So instead of self-cherishing, you should cherish others, right? How do you cherish others? By meditating. Meditate here doesn't mean, sit down and meditate. It means again and again, see, recognize, again and again, think of, again and again, turn your mind to the great kindness of everyone. You don't get there by just saying, oh yeah, everyone is so kind. To be able to really meditate on the great kindness of everyone, it has to first begin with learning how to recognize small acts of kindness that occur all around us all the time. As simple as someone holding the door for you going into a building. Just today, when I went to the store, someone did that. And I'm thinking, this person probably was thinking, in this COVID-19 days, if I have to open the handle of the door, then maybe the next person doesn't need to, Now, I don't know for sure if this person is thinking that, but it's much better, that I think like that, right? Rather than, and this is the problem of like, sort of like our modern, overly intelligent and overly cynical, Some of us have been taught, actually taught and programmed to think, this is just, this person is just wanting other people to think that he's a good person. And so that's why, they're holding the door. We have become very cynical. Instead, here, he says, meditate, think about how everyone is so kind. But that has to start with recognizing kindness. And then when we recognize kindness, then we can be kind. Then other people, it's infectious. Other people will maybe catch this. No guarantee, don't do this with any expectations, But other people might catch the kindness that you are able to express. And it makes them happy, And then when you see them happy, you also become happy. So it's infectious. So this great kindness, like we're not talking about Jesus Christ style of great kindness, like I will die for you, which is great kindness, of course. But we should not think, like that's what we're talking about. It always begins with very small things. Very small things that are maybe even just insignificant, So I'll give you an example today. When, I've been the last few days, like going to places, maybe not such a good idea, but, Asheville is still kind of safe. Looking for starts, herbs I want to plant, Not able to find basil starts. Anyway, I went and I saw, at Lowe's, there were good basil starts, so I got a basil plant and then a hot pepper plant. So I was standing in line and pretty much everyone, have face mask and doing the distancing. So everyone is doing well. So we have the garden line really long, everybody is gardening. Because we have all this time and because, it's like, I don't know where the food there might be a shortage, that's part of the reason. Apparently in the next county, kind of a rural county, people's laying hens have been disappearing. People have been stealing. I think people are a little bit anxious, Anyway, so I was standing in line. Then because the garden line was really long, so I went to the hardware, checkout areas, and there's not a lot of people, but nonetheless, standing in line. So two people on the two lines, they're paying for things, and I was behind one person. And then next to, there's also on the other line was these two women. And they didn't quite see me because I was distancing, but in my mind, I was clearly in line. So then when the person in front of my line got done, they walked in straight to it, even though they're on the other line because of where I was standing, but I was distancing. So they went up there. But very quickly, one of them noticed and she said to her friend, like, he's in line, he's in line. And I said, no, go ahead. But they really want to walk away from, they felt embarrassed. I said, no. I said, I'm not in a hurry, I'm not in a hurry, please go. Really, I'm not in a hurry. Like, what else is there to do these days, I just stood there. And they are, older than me. And I'm thinking, yeah, better they spend less time here than me, not like, self-sacrifice, but it's a simple thing, So they went. And then then one of the cashiers came up and said to us, oh, I'm opening that, you guys can come. Then people behind me walk, I didn't see them, so I was going to go. But then immediately when they saw me doing that, they're like, oh, you go first. And again, really, I didn't have anything to do. I said, I'm tired of staying at home, that's the truth, So let me just stand in Lowe's, No, you go. But then when I went out to the parking lot, the two women, the older women that was in front of me, they were getting in their car. And I got in my vehicle. And one of the women, as she was shutting her door, she saw me and she opened the door and she got out of her car and she's like, thank you. See, something happened there, right? She recognized something, I recognized something, and now I'm sharing with you, These are small things, but this is where we begin to be able to understand, like, the great kindness of everyone around us. It starts with little things. Don't underestimate the small things. It's where it matters, in just these small things, small acts of kindness that we can do, small acts of kindness that we can recognize, and stop being so cynical. This is part of what we call nihilistic, material-based cultures. That there's one side of the United States, especially, I feel. And often this is kind of like the liberal progressive side. There's an aspect of that has gotten very cynical. And many of us Dharma practitioners in the West belong to that tribe, even if personally we are not cynical. But I want to say, like, we have to watch out against being cynical. So here Lojong says, don't do that. Learn to recognize kindness wherever it is occurring. And when we do that, our heart becomes kind. Then other people will catch that. And kindness can be infectious. So let's start infecting others with kindness, with beauty. Yeah. For that, I want to report, something, and especially if you are in the Asheville area, then you can benefit from this. So one of our Urban Dharma members who really loves flowers, especially wild flowers. So now he has germinated these pots of wildflowers. Yeah? And you can easily take the whole, soil out of the pot and plant it on the ground. He has sprouted 100 of these pots. This Sunday, I've asked him to deliver 50 pots to my house. And I'm going to send out message to neighbors and say, please come and take a pot or two and go back and plant. And I'm going to come up with a note and say, infect each other with flowers and beauty and kindness. That's what we can do, you know. So find ways in your own community, yeah, how to do this. And take people's minds off, you know, all the problems and the worries and the terrible things that are going on. Yes, we have to be careful. Yes, we have to be cautious. But don't forget kindness, you know. Kindness is also infectious. Beauty is also infectious. So that's counter, right? Let's counter this other infection with this kind of infection. So if you are in the Asheville area, please come by and pick up some of these wildflowers. I'm in West Asheville. We will also set up a pickup point in East Asheville for these wildflowers. We will start sprouting maybe another 100 of these pots. So in about 10 days, we'll have another 100. And this, we have agreed, will be done as part of Urban Dharma's project. So we'll say, you know, a little gift from Urban Dharma. We're going to be giving wildflowers. And Asheville will be filled with beautiful wildflowers, butterflies, bees, all of that goodness. So please do that. This will be part of the post-meditation training for relative bodhicitta. So you have a good evening. Thank you for joining us. We will come back next Thursday. The video will be available on Facebook, Urban Dharma, North Carolina. Share it with your friends if you think this is useful to them, meaningful to them. If they are not on Facebook, we also have this on YouTube, on a particular channel that Fabiola can provide, maybe on the chat. And on Facebook, it's called the Drikung Dharmakirti Circle YouTube channel. So at the end, we do a dedication. And the dedication, I will chant in Tibetan, but the meaning of the words is, it says, Bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise. And where it has arisen, let it not decline, but let it increase higher and higher until the two aspects of bodhicitta is fully actualized. Changju semchu rinpoche ma ge banan ge gyuji ge ba nyam pa me pa yang go ne gong du Bill Sure. You have a good night.
Thank you.
Or good morning. You might be
Thank you,
in some
Dr.
other
Lai.
part of the world.
Thank you.
Hasta pronto. Hasta mañana.
Thanks, Dr. Lai.
You, Dr. Lai.